How is everyone out there? Is everybody awake? How have the sessions been so far? Oh, we got some hecklers in the crowd, some friendlies. How about this? How about, to wake everybody up before we get going, before I let Brian kick this off, how about everybody stand up? Give you guys a little stretching time, get the blood flowing a little bit so I know everybody's not sleeping out there on us. Feel free to downward dog, stretch in any manner you want.
I didn't think it was going to be that kind of a show.
Yeah, well, you got to get the blood flowing, right? In fact, this reminds me too that as we're stretching here, I heard this little story about how Brian was giving a talk last week, and he used a new analogy, and he said, I like to work out, and I want to be more flexible, but just like this journey we're going to talk to you about today, you can't do a full split on the first day, right? Don't try that. So start off slow and just get a little bit better every time. So I thought that was pretty humorous. When I first heard it, I was kind of chuckling to myself. Then I heard him on a podcast, and he said the same thing, and I started belly laughing.
But I've got all new stories today, so it'll still be fun, but different stories. All right, cool. So I don't even know how we follow that, but why don't we kick things off? My name is Brian Roche, and joining me today is
James Haefele.
And we're both from Cognizant. And so we're going to talk to you today about application transformation, and specifically app transformation with Red Hat and OpenShift. So is this just another transformation talk? What are we going to talk about today? I feel like this has been rinsed to death, right?
Yeah, so I think we've been hearing about digital transformation for a while. That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to take it down a notch lower, though, into application transformation. Try to give some real-world examples, some lessons learned from what we've seen with different clients in the insurance and financial services arenas.
Right.
And I think it's something that might apply to everybody out there. At least that's what the takeaway would be.
So it's going to be really practical, right? I think the predicate is the world has changed and everything is moving at a rapid pace. In fact, I think technology and disruption is happening at a pace like we've never seen before. So we're going to give some case studies, talk about how we actually do it with our clients, and it's not intended to be an advertisement for Cognizant or how we work. And by the way, we're both from Cognizant. This is intended to be us sharing what we see as best practices, what we see as mistakes that people have made, and hopefully you can execute your transformation journeys successfully by leveraging some of those. All right, so I got to surprise you. You know that if we're going to talk about transformation and digital transformation, we've got some statistics, right? And I love to, we've been talking about digital transformation for the past 5 years, and so there's a lot has been written. You almost can't go anywhere online without falling over a digital transformation article. And what I always find interesting is the information and the data between the cracks on some of these transformation movements. And you would think that, maybe with a show of hands we can see how many people have a transformation movement in progress at their company today. Okay, quite a few. All right, so now I'll ask the trick question. How many people believe that their transformation movement is going to be successful? Okay, so that just about jives with the statistics that we see in market. A lot of people have these transformation movements in flight or they're running, yet 4 in 5 executives don't think that these movements are going to be successful. So they think they're going to fail. Some of them think that it's just a rebranding of IT, a rebranding of what they do today. And so, when we looked at that, we thought, but it doesn't have to be that way. We execute transformation engagements every day. In fact, we've been practicing DevOps and Lean and Agile for many, many years, and we've seen it be successful. We've been to the other side. Yet, I think a lot of these companies have lost what we, anyone follow any of the Bain articles or any of the YouTube stuff? So one of the things they found was really wasn't technology that was the barrier. It was how we align ourselves and how we orient ourselves around goals. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation.
Yeah, Brian, before we go there, though, I'm very interested. So we got a good-sized audience here. I appreciate that at 4:30 in the afternoon, too. Just curious, if I look out there, who out there is kind of your infrastructure engineers, systems administrators out? Just a show of hands. And then how about in the operations side of the world? Anybody out there in the operations side of the world? Kind of combo. And then developers? All right, so we got a good kind of
mix of people, yeah. Okay.
And I think the important part here is that this is a learning journey, right? And this applies, all these lessons that we learn applies whether you're an engineer, a developer, operations, security. Really, each one of us kind of owes it to take one step on this journey, right? I think we talk a lot about digital transformation getting started from the CMOs, from the CXO suite, but really where we see the most success is where every one of those groups kind of does it at a grassroots and from a top-down approach, and everybody takes a step in the right direction. Right?
Transformation happens at every level.
Yeah, just an iteration.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because there's some key drivers, right? And I feel like we round every corner and we hear the same conversation. It is, we have all of these applications that drive our business today. They're critical. They drive 80, 90% of our revenue for our business. Yet, when we look at these apps, we don't know how to take them on a journey. We don't know how to transform them. We don't know how to take their value and unlock it, and then transpose that value or translate that value to a cloud context. And this shift to the cloud is often driven by cost and velocity. How do we improve operational efficiency in the process? And very often when we talk about platforms, we really encourage people to focus on find a platform that delivers value to you, keeps you out of prison, right? Helps you honor all your security requirements and your GRC, but enables you to go quickly. And then in the process, as you do that, then it's how can we take advantage of new technologies? One of the great things about this conference is, you walk around the expo floor and there's all this new technology and you get to learn. And it's like, I feel like I'm a kid in a candy store. You get to hear about all these great things you can incorporate into your strategy to help you to go faster, to help improve your operational efficiency. But yet many teams and many C-level executives feel like we're not well positioned to take advantage of innovation. And I'm tired of walking down the hallways and talking to someone who says, hey, we've got this amazing new mobile application that I'm using. I get to choose my life insurance. I can self-identify. I can do everything on my mobile device. And they feel like, well, we can't do that with our applications because they're all locked up here. And what was our competitive advantage, how they were architected, the infrastructure that they had chosen, has rapidly become out of date. And in some cases, out of date in the past 4 or 5 years. And they can't unlock that value. So really, the key drivers are cost, operational efficiency, and most importantly, velocity. How can we go fast while identifying ways that we can take advantage of innovative technologies and reimagine those experiences and ultimately delight users and change brand awareness. Now, all right, Jim, so we said that we were going to get specific. We said that we were going to give some case studies. And so maybe the first one we can talk about is, you're right. I feel like I'm out there a little bit talking about products, right? I lead the products organization. We think about how can we bring user feedback into the fold, and how can we build products that are going to help solve their need. So we talk to people a lot, but you are out there. You are like in the trenches meeting people every day. Let's talk first about application transformations. How do we get started? How do we make sense of taking these apps on a journey?
Sure. So like you said, Brian, it is a journey, right? And it's something that we learn every day. We make some mistakes. I might make some mistakes up here, trip over, fall off the stage. Only light laughter, please. But if you look at the traditional approach that we see, you might take a whole portfolio out there and try to do this big waterfall assessment and try to figure out what my 2-year plan is going to be to solve whatever that challenge is, right? Whatever's holding me back. And the estimates are going to be wrong. The timeframes are going to be wrong. I'm guessing that half of you or all of you have kind of seen those types of projects inside IT before, whether it's on the application development side or internal infrastructure. And so that's kind of the traditional way of doing something.
Right.
And so instead, it's we try to take things in smaller chunks, right? Get something that you can automate more around assessment. Move into how you're going to take whatever the most critical assets are on a quick journey, and just some key things on how you decide what type of journey they're going to go on to, right? Not everything's the same.
And a lot of people we talk to, they say, well, we have somewhere between 1,500 and 3,000 apps in our portfolio, and we don't even know where to start, right? I mean, and a lot of these assessments are done manually, right? Talk about how we've evolved that and how we kind of changed that strategy.
Sure, and we'll get into it a little bit in some of the lessons learned and the things we've seen in the case study, but we basically created some assets around around application assessment, right? Trying to identify what the anti-patterns are. If we're trying to solve for a certain type of work, like lift and shift, and we'll define that a little bit, or replatforming, right? How can we leverage tools to accelerate that, right? And make it consistent. And so we're not building all these spreadsheets and doing everything manually and just taking months to do that first step.
And when you talk to teams, right? I mean, how do you form these teams, and what are they made up of? Like, how do we actually deliver these projects after we've gotten over that initial manual assessment? Then, like, what's the next step then?
Yeah, so I think we'll talk about that a little bit more, right? Going into the case studies, but it's start small. You got to start somewhere. Right. This isn't about dropping 200 people in to do some type of a big initiative, right? You got to start small. You got to learn and iterate. And if you've ever heard about agile or lean properties and lean management, right? These are the same philosophies. And so each one of you, whether you're in the engineering side and you're trying to improve operations or you're trying to do something better with application development, it's just do one thing, learn from it, right? Get that feedback loop really tight, and then continue, right? Just go around that circle as fast as you can.
Right, so think big, start small. And a lot of these are like manual assessments that people are doing. And one thing that we find is that when we talk about taking applications on a journey, for small apps, that's great. It's, these journeys are going to start and end in a 3-month time frame. But what we found is, that's not really the real world. In the real world, we have these applications that have, thousands and sometimes millions of users. And taking them on that transformation journey to take that value to a cloud context, whether you're decomposing those to microservices architecture, container-based, or even if you're just lifting and shifting, some of these journeys take 4 and 5 months. So what we tend to see is these apps continue to evolve. And so one of the things that we learned was that doing portfolio assessment manually and trying to do it holistically is a sure path to failure. The apps will continue to move, they will continue to evolve in production, and so you have to take a different tact. And so with this first customer that we're going to talk about, was it like overtly tactical? Like, did we just get started and learn along the way? Was that really what we're describing?
No, in fact, it's actually multiple case studies kind of blended into one, right? Just to give a different view and lens on where they started, and then some of the challenges that they may have come across. And so what are the first problem statements, if you will? And these came from insurance and BFS, but it applies equally when we worked with large healthcare, retail, really doesn't matter, manufacturing. And so what are some of those problem statements? Like, what were they trying to solve for? And one of those was around, how do I bridge anything new I'm doing with my heritage portfolio, right? Every time I want to go do something new in a large enterprise, not in a startup, but in a large or mid-sized enterprise, I go create this whiz-bang thing, new feature, new mobile experience, whatever it happens to be, it goes and it touches my heritage portfolio. And when I go back to that heritage portfolio, I run into, oh yeah, that's going to take me 18 months, 3 months regression testing, right? All these types of things. And so I've got disparate environments. And that's where some of the snag happens, right? So that's one of the examples of a problem statement of what we're trying to solve for. Another one might be, I want to start my digital transformation, and I want to stop, right? But my challenge is I got 70% of the money going into keeping the lights on. And so currency projects. I don't know, maybe a show of hands, who's going through Windows 2012 to 2016 or any kind of a REL, right? So there's millions of dollars being spent on these currency initiatives. And so that's stopping the business from investing that into the digital side of the world, right? So just another example of where these things start. And then in other clients, we've just heard, hey, we want to move more to cloud. Now, cloud can mean a bunch of different things in our space. Cloud can mean private cloud, right? That's got automation and orchestration. It can mean a containerized platform. Right? It could also mean moving to AWS or Azure or something else. But just the directive of, hey, I want to move. I want more portability. I want to move more of my workloads, heritage and not to cloud. So that's another place where it starts. And the next piece is, okay, so where do we start? So if we know what that problem statement is, where do we start? And I will say one of the biggest gates, one of the biggest kind of fail points, one of the places where a lot of the clients get stuck, and you guys might be experiencing this yourself, it ties into this conference, right, is this caveat around, if you're going to start a journey, you need to have a reliable, solid platform. And when I say platform, sometimes you walk into a customer, and we've all been there, and that platform really is just a bunch of VMs, that everything is siloed and it's getting managed that way. So when I say platform, you need to have an operating environment that has full automation around it and orchestration, and you should be treating that platform just like you do your enterprise apps in an agile fashion. So that, DevOps, complete continuous integration and deployment and delivery for that platform itself too, no different than apps.
And I think that's when we form these what we call pods, and when we think of a pod, it's really a DevOps team, right? To kind of put in everybody's context, we have a set of engineers who will pair, and in some cases they're pairing with our clients, or we're doing the work for them on their behalf. And then we have an anchor. The anchor acts as the sort of the technical tiebreaker for decisions, architectural decisions. They also act as the person who provides continuity for that team. So why did we choose to not use Node.js? Or why did we go with Material? Or why did we choose not to use RabbitMQ? And then we have our product managers who will work to understand the value, because I think that's the key thing, which is how are these applications actually being used? So when we look at, it's easy to do a lift and shift and to simply strip out a Tomcat or strip out whatever, paid-for versions of the platform. It's a totally other thing to take these apps on a journey, and when we say that, we mean, how can we figure out how these apps are being used? What is the business value? Who are the personas? What value are they deriving from that application? And that informs, in many cases, the decisions that we make, both architecturally and how we evolve those applications to meet the needs of the business. And I think one of the reasons why we really like the Red Hat OpenShift platform is that it really enables that business agility when you form these two pizza teams, right? That overused analogy, but when you form these teams, it enables them to go quick. You talked about breaking down organizational silos. A lot of the times, business agility and velocity cannot be realized because we have downstream consumers, because we have QA separated. So I think I've often seen one of the first things you do organizationally is encourage, let's take some folks from the QA organization. Let's take some folks from ops, because we want to deploy those applications to production as quickly as we possibly can. We focus on building an end-to-end slice architecturally through the platform. So let's stand up the platform, let's stand up the containers, let's stand up the applications, and begin the decomposition process. And then let's measure how quickly we can take a story from the time of writing the product manager and our iteration planning meeting. How long does it take us to take that story directly to production? And one of the reasons that we measure that is because that is really the underpinnings of your organizational transformation and how you can rapidly take apps on a journey. Because when you begin to form these two pizza teams, these DevOps teams, and you iterate quickly, then you can begin to start taking advantage of innovative technologies and reimagine those experiences, all the while ensuring that the user is omnipresent. So how many of these are like re-platforming versus?
Yeah, sure. So a couple actually, a quick plug here as we're talking, DevOps and some of these other concepts, right? There's been a lot of books out there, a lot of reading you could do, but recently one of the ones that just came out, this book, Accelerate. I don't get anything for it, but just to plug, Nicole Forsgren, Gene Kim, Jez Humble, known names. And it doesn't matter if you're on the engineering, so the development side, the engineering side, operations side, just a really crisp way of looking at that whole journey and what does it take and how do you measure that you're actually improving.
Right. Oh yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
So if you look, right.
Should we fight over it?
No, you got the clicker. You're wow.
We could do this all day.
Yeah. So, where do these things start? Sometimes they start in a shared service offering or in the CTO office, right? You just want to be able to give this platform right out there as a reliable platform, and there might be some currency initiatives, or you're trying to bring something out to the line of business. Other times it's the line of business coming in saying, hey, I've got this challenge, right, like we mentioned before. And so it comes different places. And a big question you got to ask yourself is, what are you solving for? So we hear a lot about cloud-native apps, and how many of you are familiar with like 12-factor apps or 15-factor apps? Right? So it's really just a set of best practices and characteristics of how do you develop kind of the next generation of applications, right? How do you do it so that you're not reliant on fault tolerance in the hardware, but these things can just be, disposed of, span back up, you can have multiple instances. That's really the essence of cloud-native apps or 12-factor, 15-factor apps. But that's not necessarily what you have to do with your portfolio. If all you're trying to do is take some of the cost out of keeping the lights on, or help enable some speed and making changes in the existing portfolio, you may only need to address a few of those factors, right? And so that's the notion of lift and shift. Lift these applications off their existing environment, put them onto that new automated, orchestrated, containerized environment of some form.
And you talked about going beyond the 12 factors. Like, what are you doing when you're doing that lift and shift? Or like, how are you changing the app?
Yeah. So sometimes first you do that assessment, right? But you may only be changing things like centralized logging. You might deal with persistence, just some factors, just to get them stable on the new platform and allow you to do some development with a little bit lower risk. But again, not trying to take it through the whole journey, right? The next step might be replatforming or replacing middleware or some other component because you might get a licensing save. And further on, you're really going on that cloud native or modernization journey.
And you really still get the benefits of the platform elasticity, right? Like when you shift it to something like an OpenShift, right?
You get the elasticity, you get some cost efficiency and savings, operational efficiency in there. And a lot of things we see in customer environments is just that method of stepping back from having disparate and multi-environments. So think about QA and test and sandbox and production, right? And how they always look a little different. That's where a lot of the risk comes in this world, right, in this space. So just being able to have that in a consistent fashion alone reduces your security challenges and some other things around cost. Mm-hmm. So what are some of these findings, right? So some of the findings in the assessment phase are just, you want to automate as much as possible. We talked about the ability to have a tool that can be very objective, not subjective, not spending hours and hours doing manual assessment, be able to run your code right through a tool and then just identify the anti-patterns that you want to solve for based on what your direction is. And so that's something that we've found to be very helpful. In fact, customers where we're leveraging this type of IP, they're saying we want to bake this right into our CI/CD pipeline. So not only do we want to do it now, but every time we make changes, we want to run this same kind of a tool, automated accelerator, against that code and make sure that we're hitting what we think we're hitting.
So it's not a one-time assessment of the apps, it's a real-time assessment where you're continuously evaluating how you're evolving along the journey.
Yeah, you're baking it right into your testing,
right.
Everything that you do.
Right.
The other piece is, we talked about it a little bit, but you're trying to identify those anti-patterns, right? Those key things that you want to fix. And this isn't about doing everything. So you're not necessarily going to be injecting things like test-driven development, right, and all these other fancy things in this stage. This is really, again, about stability. One of the things we've seen out there with clients is just, starting that first phase, you pull out where you need to make improvements operationally. So you go to do this assessment on code, and you realize that they haven't moved to trunk-based development, as an example. And so where they thought the code was, the most recent level of code, really wasn't. It was out on this branch over here, right? So this process helps you improve some of those operational things too, just around how do you do application development and connecting the dots. The other piece is team. We talked a little bit about starting small and kind of the right kind of oversight, right? Architecturally, if we start with a pair of folks looking at the patterns, helping do the assessment, someone that's got the architectural oversight to say, hey, here's how we're going to solve what the new patterns are going to look like, and then here's how we're going to put them all together.
So in the real world, how does that work? Like, how do you span dependencies across teams, and how do you actually execute? Everyone have an offshore component to their development teams? Okay, it's pretty much everybody. So, how do you do that? Like, how do these teams execute? So
they're formed in a kind of a lean, agile way, right? Mm-hmm. We happen to use XP practices or extreme programming, and that just means that we're doing a lot of pairing. And the whole essence of pairing is reducing risk, and you're getting active code review too. So you may not have to move it fully to a cloud-native app, but you're still getting two folks sitting there looking at, reviewing, identifying the patterns, right? Learning from each other, upskilling too. A lot of the findings and the DORA assessments and other show that this helps increase morale of everybody too, right? Helps bring empathy, accountability, just overall reduces what might be more security risks.
Awesome. Unless they get to work for us, with us. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think anyone familiar with Kent Beck and extreme programming? Like we think of pairing as kind of that ability to up-level the knowledge of everyone on the team, and it's a great accelerator to kind of broaden everybody's perspectives. And actually, the conference, I think for us has been about broadening perspectives. I think if you look at a lot of the reasons why transformation movements are failing is that there's no defined roadmap. There's no blueprint for success. But, for me, it still comes back to, Jim, when we see this time and again, it's really people, culture, and technology. And how do we bring these together to form that all-important business value? Revenue continues to be the scorecard, and so it's how can we drive user adoption, which ultimately drives revenue. So you were making fun of me of the podcast, right? We've done a ton of podcasts on courageous leadership. So let's maybe dive a little bit deeper into organizational transformation. So you talked about teams and you gave us that context in the case study, which was amazing. Let's talk about transformation at sort of the C-level. And do we have any C-level executives here? No executives in the room? Good, so we can make fun of them. Everybody's focused. We're all moving along that mission. We know where we're trying to go, except, oh, wait, what's over there? And it's like the Dory effect. It's like, what's that shiny thing? And surprisingly, one of the reasons why transformation movements fail is because we don't have a consistent understanding and a consistent definition across all layers of our organization of what it means to actually be transformed. So in 3 or 6 months or in 9 months, how will we measure success? Do we measure success based on how quickly we can get stories into production and deploy to users? Or are we using some other kind of bogus methodology? So we talk a lot about courageous leadership, and we talk a lot about how we can form a vision and how we can communicate that vision as broadly as possible across the organization. And so some themes that we've seen in the spirit of sharing what we've seen work is that a lot of the leaders who are technical, who have had a technical background, are now rolling their sleeves up again and saying, the next new disruptive technology is not going to land in my lap with this shiny new installer and with a Word document and be really easy to use. What they're finding is, or they realize, is that transformation and disruption is everybody's challenge within the organization. And this is kind of the essence of leadership, what leadership has always been. How do we get everybody moving in the right direction? And that collective power, just think how awesome that could be. And so everybody's thinking about disruption and how we can pay it, once we have a top-down strategy, we know where we're going, then we can start to look at technology and say, how does that factor into where we're going, and how is that strategically important? One of the things we've seen bogged down constantly is people start these 40, 50 experiments. And experiments are fantastic. In fact, Lean and Agile is based on experimentation. Anyone familiar with design thinking? So it's all about forming a hypothesis and testing that experiment to determine if you're on the right track to solving user need. But it's bad when you've got 50 of them going, right? Everyone's got a blockchain and an IoT and machine learning and artificial intelligence experiment running. And what ends up happening is you're starving potential projects that could be critical to your business. And so one of the things we do with our clients is think about, are we focused? Are we focused on the mission? Has the mission been communicated more broadly? Are we all actively engaged? And are we creating self-empowered teams to execute along that mission? And the user's omnipresent, right? You said this, I love it. Think big, but start small and iterate. Anybody read Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup? Are you familiar with Build, Measure, Learn, MVP? Okay, cool. So that is what we practice. Some of the best get-togethers that we have are our weekly retros, our retrospectives, where we assess what happened over the past 5 days. And we improve, and we continuously improve. And that is the essence of these teams. And so, we encourage our clients to embrace that and have that be pervasive in how they execute all of these transformation engagements. And then I think something you said, which is like figure out the importance of the app, right? Like what is the outcome of this application when it's transformed? What are we trying to do? And then lastly, this is a tremendous community. It's a place where we can come together and learn from each other. Yeah, I love being down in the booth. We get to chat with people about where they are in their transformation. And a lot of the times, when people look at our teams, they think, wow, you guys have figured it out. You're moving fast. You've got velocity. And we say, yes, this pocket of our organization, but just like you, every part of our organization is not moving quickly, and we're in the midst of our transformation. So we learn equally from our clients. We learn from this community, and it's a great place to share ideas. So we covered the top-down stuff, right? Talk about some of the stuff that the people on the bottom can do to kind of reskill themselves and learn, and how they learn and embrace new technologies, as you've seen with clients.
Sure. So I think we've talked about a little bit, right? There's obviously plenty of reading you can do out there, but it's really by learning by doing.
Yep.
And it's not about big things as much as it is about taking some step on that journey. So if you're an application developer, right? Do you know what test-driven development is, right? So kind of researching on that side of it and understanding what the benefit is. It's not just about, hey, now I got to do this extra work before I write my code. It's that I'm going to reduce the risk in anything I do in the future, kind of morphing something. So that might be one example. Something else is that we mentioned pairing, right? Pairing just brings so much, and it can be pairing from the developer and operations perspective, security, right? Everybody just kind of working together and seeing the different lens and the different filter through which they have to operate, right? So how do we make things better? On the developer, on the engineer side, right? When you do pair programming, there's so much that gets learned. You really elevate your skill set that much quicker. One person might not really know React. The other person does. And just by putting them together over a couple sessions, they really just up-level much quicker. So that's just a couple examples, bro.
I don't know React, but definitely worked with teams that do know it. And those teams have found ways to innovate, right? They know their investment is not going to increase. In fact, they know that they're going to see a decrease in their investment month over month and sometimes quarter over quarter. So they're ruthless in their prioritization of what they're going to build and what they're going to do. And so, we live in this distributed microservices world, and those teams, the best teams, focus on having their dependencies honored. So if we're waiting on another team to deliver something, we ask them to honor that commitment. They also rely on automation. So this whole new world is predicated on how do you automate. Part of the reason why we can't take applications on a journey is the fact that they haven't been automated, tested. We're huge fans of TDD, test-driven development, because it enables us to go quickly. Those tests that you use when you're writing your functionality can become part of integration suites, security suites, and bigger suites that we use to evaluate the integrity of the system as we move forward and we move rapidly. And what we find is that enables teams to move, independently, yet they are very dependent on each other. So it's the whole notion of microservices, but formed inside of an organization. All right, so in the last few minutes, why don't we talk about, we kind of covered app transformation, a little bit of replatforming. What happens in case study number 2 when we think about we're building something like brand new? Are we throwing the baby out with the bathwater and we're completely starting over? How do we figure out how to get going in that scenario?
Yeah, so I think there's two different two different use cases I've seen there. Sorry. So one might be where they're doing something new is actually that it's sitting on some legacy platform and there's no way to move it over to a future state. So maybe I've got a bunch of services sitting out in an old framework, right? Sitting on the mainframe, sitting in some other proprietary, and I've decided I'm going to move away from that. And so that might be an easier one because, hey, I already know what those services do. I already know their intended purposes. I probably should go back and revalidate that I still need that functionality and what the end user, the end personas, right, what they're doing with that. And so that might be one where it's a little more straightforward, right? Mm-hmm. But a big piece is how do you up front determine what that true scope is, right?
Right.
Goals, anti-goals, right? What you're really solving for in a greenfield environment, and then that formation of the right type of team.
Yeah, and I think in one of the examples when we engaged, the team had originally been looking at how do we get off the mainframe and how do we reimagine this experience. So whether it's a more rapid onboarding experience for an insurance company or self-selection, whatever the experience happens to be, we took a different approach and we said, well, you know what? Let's leave the mainframe where it is, but let's build that new experience on the front end. And that was a place where we did violate, so we could go quickly, where we did violate that notion of, are we building something end to end? Because we knew the functionality of the back end pretty much worked. We weren't going to change too much of it. But how that was represented to the user and how they interacted with that content was completely different. And so we wanted to take that app on a journey, but we wanted to prove out or disprove the assumption that this is how the service could or should be delivered in the future. And so I think that was a good example to call out in the case of Greenfield for how we would build this more rapidly in a scenario where I think in that discussion we were saying, well, what if someone had a gun to your head, right? The whole team was there and everyone's saying, we can't possibly go fast, we can't do that, that would not be appropriate, we would accumulate unvalidated risk and debt, and it would just be a bad thing. And so we said, well, if you had only 2 hours, what would you do? What would be the simplest thing you could do? And what we saw was the teams began to solution. And we began to work together to find a solution to something that where we thought we couldn't achieve that velocity and go fast. So very often it's not about completely re-architecting a system and building something from scratch. So let's maybe we can do like a shameless plug for like Cognizant VSM, which is a tool that we have used. I think we recognize that a lot of these patterns, they're programmatic patterns, right? When we see them, we know how to fix them, and we thought, well, we could bring software to bear here. We could bring software that could solve this problem. And what we started to find when we were doing these transformation engagements, that it wasn't nice to have, it was imperative. The apps continue to evolve in production. Those legacy applications don't go away over time, don't go away and get transformed in like a month or 2 months. Sometimes they live around for 2 years. And so we found this is, when you reference the real-time analytics tool, this is where we take those manual assessments and we look at either an application, subset of the apps, or the entire portfolio. And we determine the patterns that have been used, whether it's Model View Controller 2, or how these apps have been built. And a lot of those, frankly, patterns are anti-patterns for this new world. Right? A lot of what we got to do in the replatforming case is, like you said, change logging, strip out some servers, et cetera, to get it into like that container platform. And so this is something you want to talk about this? Because I know you've been directly involved with this as it's been deployed in clients and engagements, and your experiences with it.
Yes. So for us, inside our clients, this has created a huge amount of value for them, right? Just helped shrink the timelines, being able to take just point at source code for 40 different applications, pull it into the tool, dump out the assessment reports, and just kind of take a journey. It doesn't matter if it's .NET apps or Java apps where we started, right? The bulk of our customers' workloads that we're focused on with the tool right now. And then just be able to spit out and say, okay, here's what the cloud suitability is today. Here's what the level of effort might be and the number of anti-patterns that popped up, right? And be able to customize that too and say, okay, I only want to address these top 10. And so then be able to say, okay, that means now when I look at those 20 or 40 apps, there's 10 that are smalls, there's 5 that are mediums, and the rest that are all large. And from a amount of effort to do this journey. And then you can start doing some quick back of the napkin estimation and not spending tons and tons of time on it.
So it's kind of like a barometer, right? It gives you that important intersection of what is the risk, cost, and time to take these apps on a journey. And I think what I love about it is that it's data-driven, right? It helps us focus on the data and understand how we can take these apps on a journey and do real-time analysis along the way. So that's almost all we have time for. So I think you always make fun of me of this slide, right? Like it's all fun
until we
get punched in the face, right? And thankfully nobody got punched here. But like digital transformation is a lot like, and taking these apps on a journey is a lot like diving into this lake and you're trying to swim across the other side and you get halfway, right? It feels good in the beginning, but then you get tired and the water's cold. And what we've seen is our advice is keep going, because when you get to the other side, you reach a place where you're able to deliver more quickly. You've improved your operational efficiency, especially when you choose a platform like the ones we were all talking about here this week. one that enables you with that kind of business velocity and agility, and it gets out of your way so you can focus on building business value. And then in the process, you get to transform your company, transform your team, and most importantly, transform your people and transform yourself, because organizations don't change, people change. So speaking of people, we are here. We have a booth downstairs. We'd love to see you. Part of these talks and part of these conferences are the conversations and the debates we have, and we want to learn from you as much as hopefully you want to learn from us. So with that, we want to thank you all for being here. We appreciate it. So I'm Brian, and this is
Jim. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.